Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei episode review where I'll be going over the anime, manga, and light novel to talk about all of the differences between them and everything that the anime skipped, because there is a lot that the anime does skip. So, without further ado, let's get into this, starting with episode 7, What Lies Beyond Effort. So the anime skips us a little ahead into wintertime, meaning that we should be at the end of K414 or the beginning of K415 as we watch Eris and Ghislaine spar. While Ghislaine does a bunch of fancy maneuvers with the sword, Eris is able to block and react to pretty much all of it. And Ghislaine even says that Eris could become an advanced rank swordsman soon. However, Rudeus, he's not doing so well. And when it comes to math, however, that's where Eris isn't really doing too well either. And we see her attempts in multiplication. She does 6 times 7 equals 41, and 9 times 7 equals 42. I can only give her so much credit, but yeah, she's not doing the best. But in response to Rudeus telling her that she's doing it wrong, she goes up and raises her hand only to sit back down and correct her mistakes. And would you look at that, she's growing. But what's interesting is that they're using regular pen and paper to do multiplication rather than the addition board like they did in the last episode. And so I feel like they could have just been doing this from the start. They don't really need the whole board, but I mean, whatever. Rudeus is the teacher. He knows best, I guess. And we see Eris and Ghislaine using magic, in which Ghislaine's actually able to conjure magic properly, so let's give a round of applause to her. But then Hilda shows up and Eris excitedly shows her what she's been learning, but then Hilda gives Rudeus a spiteful gaze, and not even Ghislaine knows what's up. But we then cut to Rudeus as he's finally completed the beautiful statue of our goddess Roxy, and he included all of the details right down to her holy relic. And while he's worshipping his creation, he gets a knock on the door from Edna, the etiquette teacher. Edna says that she wants Eris to have more etiquette classes because her 10th birthday is coming up in about half a year. And because of the timeline here, it seems like that Eris should have a birthday a couple months before Rudeus. At first I thought her birthday took place in summer, but I believe it might take place around like October-ish. It would be pretty fitting if she had an October 31st birthday, I guess. But the point is, a huge party is going to be held and nobles from all across the land will be invited, and the main event will be a dance performed by Eris. At that, Rudeus laughs, but a good noble must be a good dancer, and Eris at this rate won't really be properly able to dance for the party. And so that's why Edna asks for Rudeus to give Eris more etiquette classes. And because Rudeus wants Eris to have fond memories of her birthday, he happily obliges. Or that was the reason what he said anyway. In reality, it's just an opportunity to get some more free time by himself. A little bit later, we see Philip showing Rudeus some books from the library, and one that's written in the beast god tongue. Rudeus says that he's interested in learning the language of the beast race. Philip is overjoyed by this because that means that they could hire even more beast folk servants. And Rudeus goes on to say how much he loves their ears, while Philip loves their tails the most, due to how they twitch in emotion. And now, because of this conversation, Rudeus is just so determined to learn the beast god tongue. Later, Rudeus begins writing a letter to Roxy. He updates her on how life is and informs her that he's going to be learning the beast god tongue. A few he lists off are the beast god, battle god, and demon god tongue. And there's a few more even after that. And Rudeus says that because he's young, he can learn things easier just because that's how a child brain works. But then we cut to the next day where he can't learn a damn thing. Well, technically I don't think it's the next day because we now see its nice green scenery, meaning we're probably coming up to Eris's birthday. But the battle god tongue, we find out, is a lot similar to the human tongue, so it's not that difficult to learn. But the demon god tongue has him stuck. As Rudeus sits in frustration, Eris slams a door in the hall and runs away. According to Edna, she's having difficulty learning how to dance. And then she begs Rudeus to get Eris to return to her lessons. Rudeus then goes to Eris's usual haystack and tries to climb up it before getting just kicked off. Eris says that she doesn't need etiquette and will just skip her party, like, no big deal to her. She doesn't understand why she has to do things that she's not good at, and Rudeus thinks back to his old life since he thought the same way. However, Eris says that he wouldn't understand what it's like since he can do just anything. Rudeus retorts and says that he's having a hell of a time trying to learn other languages, but keeps at it because the more difficult it is, the bigger the reward will feel like. He asks that if she returns to dance, he'll even come with her and learn alongside her. She slides down the haystack and punches him in the back of the head as they make their way to the dance lesson. And in there, Eris absolutely cannot keep up with the rhythm and somehow ends up launching Rudeus halfway across the room because physics. But we then cut to a montage of Rudeus trying to learn some languages, and he's sitting with Ghislaine and she teaches him how to pronounce a certain word. And then we cut to him in his bedroom, and he's learning what I can only guess is the demon god language. And then we get a shot of Eris learning how to dance while we see Rudeus sell one of his precious Roxy figures for a whole gold coin. But despite being frustrated, we see Eris with Rudeus, and things have certainly improved when it comes to her dancing. But then one day, Ghislaine suddenly arrives in Rudeus' room with a large wooden crate. It is a care package from Roxy. And apparently, it smells of her, so that's fantastic. Her letter basically says how much she's proud of Rudeus and is amazed at how far he's come. Teaching the Lord's daughter and being taught by the Sword King Ghislaine? That's impressive stuff. And then Roxy, meanwhile, is still dealing with Pax, the prince she's tutoring, and she still sets him on fire. But she says that he had purchased a figure recently that looks just like her, down to the moles and everything. And we do see a certain someone in the background as she talks about that, but hearing about Rudeus wanting to learn the demon god tongue, Roxy knows how hard it is to learn it, and so she went ahead and wrote an entire textbook by hand just to help him learn it. And we actually get to see a couple pages of it, and nearly everything is written out twice. Once in the demon god tongue, and the second time in the human tongue. And so the pages read as follows. Around us. Look at the traditional items of the demons. Increasing your vocabulary is a shortcut to learning foreign languages. What is this? This is a sword. Is this a sword? No. This is tobacco. Articles. Is this a book? Yes, this is a book. Thank you. You're welcome. And by the way I'm able to translate all this stuff, which, first of all, I didn't do. It was done by this Reddit user. I forget their actual name, but it's on the screen. And as you may or may not know, the demon god and like all the languages in Mushoku Tensei, at least in the anime, they are based on actual languages in real life. For example, the human tongue is based on Basque, while the demon god tongue is based on Zulu. And so that's how you're able to translate it. It's kind of just they switch out the letters to the languages, basically, and they switch them around. I don't exactly know how it works, but somebody went ahead and translated it online and created a whole, I don't know how to put, just, they did a translation of all of the letters. And so it's really cool. And that's how I'm able to go about translating this stuff, which some of it is done already online by people, but some of it I do it myself. But anyway, we go back to some more dance practice, and according to Edna, the party, and therefore Eris's birthday, is the next day. And then we waste no time and we cut to the next day, and the party is booming and Rudeus is eating, and we find out from him that rice is pretty rare in most parts of the world, which, as much as I wish every day and night that I could be like reborn into a world like Mushoku Tensei, I don't know if I could do that without rice. Rice is a daily meal for me. But anyway, Soros then introduces the star of the party, Eris. She is now officially 10 years old, and she's wearing her hair in a ponytail with a little white flower in it and wears a beautiful white dress. Soros said that he prepared delicacies from every corner of Asura just for this day. Meanwhile, both Edna and Rudeus are a little worried, yet hopeful that everything goes smoothly for today. The main event is about to start as Eris stands in the middle of the hall room as Soros tells someone to come up and dance with Eris. Some boy comes out and starts dancing with her, but she's just way too fast, and she ends up tripping and slams her face into the floor. Rudeus then walks up behind Eris and asks her to dance. The two begin dancing as she still continues to trip. However, Rudeus then tells her to close her eyes as he casts a spell on her to make her good at dancing. And then he tells her to move as though she's dodging a sword on his command. And with the spell that he casted and with the commands he said, they're able to complete the dance perfectly without a hitch. When Edna asks Rudy what just happened there, Rudeus explains that he knew that timing wasn't the problem. He says that there's a lot of rhythm and timing needed in swordsmanship, and so he applied some of what they do on the battlegrounds to the dancing grounds. Eris then calls Rudeus amazing and is proud of her own achievements, but then suddenly 3 young ladies all around Eris's age, if not a little older, come up to Rudeus and are taking an interest in him. Philip, however, says that he'd prefer that Rudeus doesn't stand out too much, but because it's a special day, he'll let it slide and he'll let Rudeus sleep with one of them. But he has to use protection. But Eris then slaps Rudeus and drags him away. But looking at these 3 girls, they do look a little familiar. After the party, we cut to Eris and Ghislaine as Rudeus gives them a wand, much like how Roxy gave him one. But Eris says that she'd much rather have one of the figures and grabs the Sylphie figure, while Ghislaine gets down on her knee and graciously accepts her wand. Seeing Ghislaine, Eris then puts down the Sylphie figure and follows Ghislaine's footsteps, taking a knee. After accepting the wand, she looks over at Ghislaine expecting a gift from her, but then Ghislaine pulls off one of her rings. What's a little funny is Ghislaine takes the ring off of her pinky finger and Eris has to put it on her ring finger, just showing like the sheer difference in size between the two. And even then it still looks a bit too big. But this ring is a talisman passed down by her people. It's said that evil wolves won't attack you when you wear it, but she just says that it's superstition. Rudy asks why it's just a superstition, but then Ghislaine begins to explain how Paul had invited her to go and swim one night, and then Rudeus cut her off. But we cut to the next morning how Rudeus and Eris slept together, but not like that. And it's at this moment that I apparently just stopped recording. So let me fill in the blanks and finish this anime portion of the review. Rudeus says wow in the most off-putting way possible, wow, as he looks at her sleeping. He's about to touch Eris before he sees that she's holding the wand that he gave her and starts to think that maybe the ring really does work. Rudeus goes for a stroll and decides to explore a tower and catches Soros using one of his catgirl maids in ways that I will not explain. After the maid runs away, Soros and Rudeus have a conversation. Soros points out the floating red orb in the sky, but says that it's not dangerous. Rudeus asks why he thinks that, and Soros just says, it's better that way. The orb almost looks like an accurate depiction of a black hole, oddly enough, but Rudeus decides to pray to it and wishes for girls to fall from the sky. He better be careful what he wishes for. But that is it for this anime portion of the review, and so let's move straight on to the manga. And so in this we start off with Philip and Rudeus heading to the library when Eris barges out of her room and says that she doesn't want to dance. Edna then puts a hand to her head and says that she's worried that Eris will make an embarrassment of herself in the family. Philip then reacts and exaggerates his movements and speech, going, "Oh, how terrible, if only someone could help. Hey Rudeus, are you busy?" And then from there, Rudeus talks Eris into continuing practice. But rather than being punched away from the haystack, he gets a heel to the head, which gives him a nice view, but then gets kneed in the gut. And it's here during the practice that Rudeus teaches Eris about incorporating swordplay into dance. And then she starts practicing from here, and an unspecified amount of time takes place between now and we're already at Eris' 10th birthday. And so that means we should again be in October of K415, but I don't know for sure. But things get even more different when we open up the third volume, because it's kind of like a cliffhanger. The birthday starts and then it's over. But then we just get a shot of Rudeus in the opening panel for some reason. So that's like super cool, I guess. We see what he's up to. Like, he literally doesn't show up again in this volume. So it's kind of just funny. He's just there and then gone. But anyway, back to the party. But thanks to the volume cover and a colored page, we see that Eris isn't wearing the white dress like she's in the anime, but rather a blue dress with a rose in her hair. We also missed out, in the manga, we have a ponytail Ghislaine in a suit. And, you know, I don't find, women in suits, it's whatever to me. It's not like I'm aroused or anything like some people are, but Ghislaine in a suit? Not bad. But Rudeus notices how hungry Ghislaine and Eris are, and so he pulls aside one of the maids and talks to her about something. But Philip then tells Rudeus to not make a scene and not to mention that he's a Greyrat. However, almost instantly, many women are interested in Rudeus and pile up on him. Some are from the Ames family, and some are from the Botches family, or Bach family. But the dance, however, is about to start, as someone walks up to Eris and already asks her if he can have her first dance. But she rejects him and says that she already has a partner. And then she pulls Rudeus from the pileup of women, but she asks him if he'd like to dance with her. It's interesting. She's the one who initiates it rather than vice versa in the anime. But of course, Rudeus spits in her face and says no. I'm kidding. He says yes. No shit. Eris ends up dancing like a robot, and Rudeus has to make a bunch of silly faces to keep Eris distracted from her nerves. And in order to better synchronize with Eris on the rhythm, he pulls her in closer and she freezes, holding her head down. Blushing, Eris tells Rudeus that they can continue, and so they do. But as they dance, Philip notices Eris' change in demeanor, and Rudeus says that Eris is doing great and says that he's having a good time, to which she laughs and says that she is as well. The dance ends shortly after, and Rudeus pulls Ghislaine and Eris aside to show them the secret meal that he's prepared for them. However, before the two get to eat, Rudeus stops them and gives them their wands. And then we cut to in the middle of the night, where Rudeus wakes up next to a sleeping Eris and is about to touch her before once again saying that he's warded off by the ring. Rudeus then turns over and goes back to sleep, but what's different though is it turns out that Eris was actually awake for this and blushes without feeling the need to even retaliate. But now it's at this point that the manga is going to be completely derailing from the anime, and so I'm not too sure how much detail I should go about into it because it might be covered next episode, but I'll just go into it now. Basically, Rudeus enters the library and finds Philip inside, and Rudeus was looking for a book to help him read the demon god tongue because he had purchased a book in the demon god language despite wanting a book called Summoning Circle, but they were kind of just sold out of it, and so he just picked out this book. But as Philip searches for a book, he says that he's impressed by Rudeus and says that he'll certainly be of use to him. Hilda suddenly comes in and scowls at Rudeus before talking to Philip for a moment, but then she takes her leave. But Philip goes on to explain why Hilda hates Rudeus so much. He asks if Rudeus ever wondered why Eris didn't have any siblings. And Eris actually does, however. She has a younger and an older brother. And the two are depicted quite similar to what Rudeus looks like when he's young and old, which is interesting. But both Philip and his older brother competed to be the head of the Boreas family, and he had lost. And so because of that, his brother, the current head of the family, had taken his sons away from him. As far as the public knows, they were simply adopted in, but it's actually a tradition. Basically, they kind of act as hostages so that no power struggle can happen from the other losing family. Because of this, Hilda is treating Rudeus harshly, because if even her own son can't be here, why is this random kid here? Philip hopes that Rudeus can forgive Hilda, especially because Philip likes Rudeus. As long as Rudeus is as good as he appears, he'll be sticking around. But as Rudeus remains kind of just confused, Philip returns to his room and leaves Rudeus alone. But not before telling him that since Ghislaine is from the Doldia tribe, she could help him learn the Beast God tongue. But going back to what Rudeus was in the library to begin with, he continues his search to hunt for a book that can help him learn the Demon God tongue. But then he remembers Roxy, and although we don't actually see it, we do know that he writes a letter to her. And so, as you can see, the manga did things quite differently, and it's not until much further after that when Rudeus sees the orb in the sky. However, we do get a Roxy interlude chapter, which I'll be going over next time because we do get a light novel Roxy-like interlude story as well, so I'll discuss both of them there. However, we're not quite done with the manga yet because I still want to quickly go over the bonus story that's at the end of Volume 2. It's called The Greyrat Household Maid. So I wonder who it's about. But basically goes over what we already know. Paul had seduced and forced himself on Lilia in the past, taking her first time when they were younger. Lilia also admitted that she was the one who seduced Paul to get her pregnant, and she recalled how Rudeus helped her out and how she finally felt a part of the family. As Lilia serves Rudeus tea, she bows to him, thanking him for all that he's done for her, and that she will serve him till the end of her days. But she says that isn't enough, but she'll also let her kids serve him for the rest of their life as well. So it's not overly important, but I figured I'd just quickly go through it anyway. But with all of that, we are done with the manga for today, and so let's move on to the light novel. So the light novel starts off by saying that a year has passed, but it doesn't exactly specify the exact date. So I'm going to assume we're in October of K415 like everything else. But it's stated that Eris is already an intermediate sword god practitioner, and according to Ghislaine could become advanced here in just a few days. All this despite only being 9 years old, which is kind of crazy. But Eris' skill in reading, writing, and math, however, still isn't the best, but it's passable, I guess. It's like a C+. But Ghislaine, on the other hand, is desperately trying to learn all of this because apparently at one point in the past, she had actually been sold as a slave because she was deceived and couldn't read. But when it comes to magic, Eris was able to master the basics of the elements except for earth, but Ghislaine could only do simple fireballs. And neither of them could really do silent spellcasting, which is interesting because it was previously stated that, like, younger people or those who don't know magic, it's easier for them to learn silent spellcasting. So I guess either Sylphie was just good and Rudeus is wrong and it is more difficult than it seems, or just these two are just really shitty at magic, which is probably the case. But being so close to the main event, the maids and butlers, who normally aren't really even allowed to jog in the halls, are just full-on sprinting sometimes to get to where they need to go. Originally, Soros wanted the party to be a self-serve standing buffet, but due to Philip's suggestion, he had turned it into a dance party. But as Rudeus was wondering, he was wondering if cakes were complimentary on birthdays because he was sure that they existed in this world. As he wandered the halls, hugging the wall to stay out of people's way, out came Eris running away from her dance lessons. And it's funny how different each version of this scene is. But apparently there's less than a month away till Eris' birthday, and Edna tries to get Rudeus to help her out. But the way that Edna convinces Rudeus to help out is when she says, but Eris will become the laughingstock on her birthday. That would be far too cruel if that were to happen. And because birthdays are only celebrated on your 5th, 10th, and 15th birthdays, having one of Eris's birthdays be filled with nothing but depressing and sad memories would just be awful, and so Rudeus, of course, helps. When Rudeus finds Eris on the haystack, the scene is presented a little bit more of a combination between the anime and the manga. Eris absolutely kicks Rudeus off the haystack, but he climbs back up, and she doesn't heal him in the head, she kind of just rests it on his head. But as Rudeus convinces Eris to dance, they make their way to Edna, and we find out a little bit more about her teaching style. You thought that Paul wasn't a great teacher? Well, Edna's kind of worse. All she'd go is like, wrong, no, do it this way. Just remember it. And so yeah, she's not really that good, so no wonder Eris doesn't want to learn dance. But then Rudeus performs some magic on her and makes Eris close her eyes. He tells her to take a step whenever he claps his hands and says yes. The reason for this is because Eris will be pretending that she's watching for Ghislaine's feints and dodging them. Whenever she'd do a feint, Ghislaine would call out yes to help him dodge. And so it's the same thing here, but with dance. But Edna's quite over the top and excited for Eris's advancement and wonders how he'd thought to combine swordplay with dancing. But Rudeus says that there are dancing that incorporates swords. And so it's only natural to combine these two together. But Edna's confused and it's like, where do people dance with swords? But Rudeus describes like, oh shit, I guess this isn't from this world. It's from a distant country, like the Greyrat continent. Yeah, it's only found in like certain demon tribes. But Edna's impressed with Rudeus' knowledge, and Eris interjects to say that Rudeus is amazing. She just loves Rudeus now, it's awesome. But now is the day of the dance, the day of the young lady's 10th birthday. Eris is all dolled up in her dress, which is a different design from both the anime and the manga. And it's different from the cover as well here. It doesn't even look like this. It's just so different. I love the inconsistencies between the anime, manga, and light novel. It's crazy. Because that's literally a picture from the party, but it's not the same dress. However, we do get an image of it, of course, and it's stated to be a blue dress. So it's similar to the manga, but it just isn't. But many of the nobles wandered around and talked amongst themselves, while some brought their sons to get the chance of getting close with Eris. However, despite their good looks, most of them were kind of just obnoxious and loud, which makes sense for noblemen. But it was the time for the dance, in which Eris was very nervous about. And as Rudeus and Eris danced, the way that Rudeus got through it and actually had a successful dance, kind of, is by throwing her off and adding additional steps and feints to the dance. And in response, she gets annoyed and stomps on his feet multiple times throughout. But things, I guess, went off without a hitch, basically, and nobody ended up falling. So I guess that is a success, kind of. But Rudeus then later notices Ghislaine drooling over the food, and although she and the butlers and maids and stuff couldn't get a meal afterwards, it was nothing compared to the food that was served now. And so Rudeus decided to get a maid to wrap up some food and have it brought back to his room. And just as he did that, a young lady approached him and asked Rudeus to dance. And then another one. And another one, and another after that. Probably over half a dozen girls asked Rudeus to dance with them, and afterwards Philip approached Rudeus, explaining that despite him wanting to keep his identity a secret, Soros proudly claimed that Rudeus was a Greyrat in blood, and so many nobles sent their daughters to dance with Rudeus after that. But if Philip knew this, like from the start, Rudeus asks why he didn't just talk to him after Eris and his dance, to warn him to say no to those future dances. However, Philip said that he thought that it was endearing that Rudeus was like preparing food for Ghislaine, and so he didn't want to interrupt him, but then that's immediately when he got called for dances after dances. And so he kind of had no time to really tell Rudeus until now. But Rudeus then compliments Philip on his awareness of his surroundings and thought to himself that he could create a whole harem with how popular he is right now, to which Philip basically reads his mind and tells him to not stain the family name like Paul did. So, Rudeus won't be having a harem anytime soon. But after that, the last lady to approach Rudeus was Eris herself. She wore the long blue dress with her hair up in a ponytail and a flower in it. Rudeus says that she looks lovely, and despite being uncomfortable and exhausted, she seemed pretty excited and spoke. Without any loud voice or like the wide leg stance, she acted as though she was one of the other girls who had come up to Rudeus before and asked him to dance. And to which Rudeus graciously accepts. And as they make their way to the center of the room, she giggles lightly, all prim and proper. And for some reason, an unusually fast-paced song starts playing, and Eris starts to panic because they didn't practice for this kind of song. However, the unusual beat fit Eris' style a bit more, and Rudeus took her hand and moved her in and out. Their dance may have looked a little irregular to outsiders, but she was giggling and laughing like any other girl her age. And so when the dance was over, Soros picked the two of them up and ran out to the courtyard with them on his shoulders. But finally, the party ended as Rudeus invited Ghislaine and Eris to her room. But in reality, it was only an invite for Ghislaine, but Eris tagged along because of course she would. But seeing the table full of food, Eris' stomach growled, likely because she didn't eat anything due to her nervousness and simply being too busy to during the party. But Rudeus then poured 3 glasses of wine, and although the legal drinking age in Asura was 15, they thought they'd bend the rules a little bit for such a special occasion. But kids, don't do that. Don't. Legal age is like 21 in some countries, which is a little excessive, I have to say. Here in Canada, it's 18, so, we're pretty chill about that. But 15 and under? No. Actually, I think that you can be, 15, 16, so long as there's parental supervision. As long as your mother's there with you, I guess it's no problem. But Rudeus isn't with his mother, so don't be like Rudeus. There's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't be like Rudeus, but this is one of the, many on the list. But the scene went pretty similar to how it did in the anime and the manga, but after Eris and Ghislaine received Rudeus' wand, we get a little bit more detail about Ghislaine's ring. It's apparently a well-worn ring made out of some kind of wood-like material, but it reflected a greenish light, whether being due to the material or maybe it's like a magical item. But anyway, the next morning, Rudeus headed to the tower, which apparently he was told to never enter, and he soon found out why. But as he climbed the stairs, he could hear the seductive meow coming from one of the maids as though she's in heat. But once Rudeus reached the top, he saw a cat girl maid and Soros going at it. And when Soros noticed Rudeus, all he had to go and say was, And then he just continued going at it like he wasn't even there. But meanwhile, the cat girl maid was almost more excited now that Rudeus was there and she was being watched. And I realized that I might be going into a little bit too much detail about the situation, but this is Mushoku Tensei, we get a lot of this sometimes. But the point is, she leaves, and now we have the wise old sage mode Soros and Rudeus left remaining in the tower. Rudeus tries to take a step forward, but Soros stops him and asks him why he's up here. Rudeus just says that he's kind of just exploring and returns the question, why was he up here? But Soros then says that he was praying to the gem up in the sky, and it looks as though something is moving on the inside of it. According to Soros, he says that it just showed up one day 3 years ago, but it isn't dangerous. Again, the reason being just because it's better to think of it as not dangerous, for the safety of your mind, basically, not to worry about it. But Soros asks Rudy if he wants to join him on a carriage ride, to which Rudeus accepts. However, before leaving, Rudeus asks Soros if he has a life, considering what he was doing with the maid, but after grinding his teeth, Soros replies that she is dead. So that's a little bit depressing, but hooray, we get a new Eris update! Name, Eris B. Greyrat. Occupation, granddaughter of Fidoa's liege lord. Personality, a little violent. Does listen properly. Reading and writing, almost perfect at reading. Arithmetic, can do numbers up to 99. Magic, can chant almost all the basic spells. Fencing, sword god style, intermediate tier. Etiquette, skilled enough to not embarrass herself at a party. People she likes, grandfather, Ghislaine, and Rudeus. Rudeus finally made the list, hooray! But apparently after Eris' 10th birthday, she had become a lot more well-behaved, which allowed Rudeus a little bit more free time, because he's no longer having to fear for his life. But now because of this, he was able to get in a lot more reading. But are you ready for an exposition dump? Because I know I am, and so I am not going to be taking my eyes off this book for the next 10 minutes as I have to read you a whole bunch of lore. So, I hope you love lore as much as MatPat does, because we are getting a whole 10 pages of it. So strap yourselves in, because this is a long one. More than 100,000 years ago, the world was split into 7 smaller worlds, each with its own god to rule over it. This was called the Ancient Age of the Gods. These 7 worlds and their respective gods were the world of humans, human god. The world of demons, demon god. The world of dragons, dragon god. The world of beasts, beast god. The ocean world, sea god. The sky world, sky god. The barren world, barren god. These gods were separated by barriers, so coming and going was no easy task. Someone who lived in one world had no idea there were other ones. Only the gods and those strong enough to cross those barriers knew of the other worlds. 20,000 to 10,000 years ago, in the dragon world, an incorrigibly evil dragon god was born. With his incredible and dreadful power, he destroyed the barriers separating the worlds. With his followers, known as the 5 Dragon Commanders, he began destroying the other worlds. Survivors from each destroyed world fled to the other worlds seeking shelter. When there was only one other world left, the Dragon God's commanders finally turned on him. The head of the 5 Dragon Commanders, the Dragon Emperor, and the other 4 Dragon Kings fought the Dragon God in his overwhelming power. 5 versus 1 in a battle to the death. It ended in a draw. The Dragon World crumbled in the aftermath, leaving only the human world. That was this world. 10,000 to 8,000 years ago. Known as the Chaotic Period. A period where the ancestors of modern humans and the refugees from other worlds after being thrown together began clashing. There exists almost no literature from this period, but according to scholars, after many years of strife, the races slowly became segregated. The beast folk began living in the woods, the water folk controlled the oceans, and the sky folk secured the highest places they could find. There were nearly no dragon folk left, but they avoided attention and lived secretly, while the void folk, who could live anywhere, spread themselves out. That left the humans and the demons to fight between themselves on the plains. At the time, the central continent and the demon continent were still joined by land and called the Great Continent. Approximately 7,000 years ago. Martial arts and magic were developed, and the population increased. This was also when the first Great Human-Demon War occurred. As the name implies, it was a head-on collision between the humans and the demons. Something like a world war in the world of my previous life. It was a long battle that involved not only the humans and demons, but other races as well. Approximately 6,000 years ago. 1,000 years passed as the Great War raged on. With fierce battles and lulls interspersed between, the hero Ars led his 6 commanders to battle, continuing his hostilities until he defeated the 5 great demon kings and the great emperor of the demon world, Kishirika. Approximately 5,500 years ago. Being the fools they were, the humans got drunk off power from defeating the demons and began warring against other races, as well as among themselves. Demons were reportedly used as slaves during this time. The period of constant war continued for almost 500 years. The Second Great Human-Demon War broke out. Seeking vengeance for a 1,000-year grudge, Kishirika, the great emperor of the demon world, stirred the demons into action. I thought Kishirika was some sort of name each emperor received as they took the throne, but apparently the emperor was immortal. Even if they died, they would revive hundreds of years later. Perhaps the reason they were called the Great Emperor of the Demon World was because they were a rank above the other dragon emperors. Either way, the demons made allies of the beast folk and sea folk, overwhelming the humans. The humans were driven into a corner. 4,200 years ago, the Second Great Human-Demon War came to an end. The warmongering humans fought for 800 years without admitting defeat and finally forced their enemy back. This was thanks to the efforts of the legendary hero, Golden Knight Aldebaran. This guy was a total cheater. He routed over 10,000 men by himself. He defeated all the powerful demons he encountered and fought one-on-one with the Great Demon Emperor. His final attack was so powerful that it created a hole in the Great Continent, splitting it into the Central Continent and the Demon Continent, with the Ringus Sea in between. One passage wore that he was the human god himself. The whole thing about him splitting the continent sounded like a load of garbage, but it was true that the continent separated into 2, forming a new ocean. A long-sought peace finally settled over the land once the continents split. 4,200 to 1,000 years ago. Time passed quickly after that. The world was at peace, but the demons were being driven from the central continent. The humans were a clever bunch, using diplomacy to corral all the demons into the demon continent. The central continent's land was naturally lush and easy to live on, whereas the demon continent's land was barren and prone to magic accumulating in certain areas. By forcing the last of those foul demons onto the demon continent and blockading it, the humans were metaphorically slipping a silk cord around their necks and strangling them with it. This was all done with the cooperation of the other races, in the hopes that there would never be a great human-demon war ever again. The demons most likely resisted this in some way. They were, after all, on the receiving end of a concerted attack. But whatever their reaction was, no war broke out. As a result, they soon became desensitized to the way they had been restricted from leaving their continent. In that harsh environment, with the scarce resources being fought over, civil war naturally broke out. This forged them into fierce warriors, but their numbers dwindled. 1,000 years ago, the demon god Laplace came into being. In the long history of demons, there were many demon kings and demon emperors, but there was only one who people referred to as the demon god. In a relative blink of the eye, Laplace rallied the demons and conquered the demon continent. The records from battles at the time turned into war chronicles that were passed down. Even now on the demon continent, Laplace is still treated like an idol. Laplace spent many years cultivating his empire, grooming his race to be tough and fierce. 500 years ago, the start of Laplace's military campaign. After many long years spent winning over sea folk and beast folk, Laplace finally made his assault on the central continent. The humans were forced into war far more brutal than they had ever fought before. Laplace launched his invasion from the south, drawing all the humans' military power there. Then he set his worms upon the land, making passage through the mountains impossible. After that, he took the humans by storm, attacking with a separate unit from the north, scattering his enemies. In a short time, he had gained total control of the north and south. Then, from both directions, he pressed his assault on the western region. 400 years ago. Forced into a corner, the humans took their last gamble. The 7 heroes convinced the sea folk to lift their blockade, then set out on the seas for the Millis continent. Millis had escaped the invasion for many reasons, such as the barrier around Holy Millis, its robust army of holy knights, and the topography that made it difficult for a large army to disembark. Part of the reason they were so isolated was due to a great forest that covered the north. Now, allied with the demons, the beast folk had taken control of the holy city of Millis. So the 7 heroes set out about persuading them to their side. Or rather, the 7 went to the head of each clan, took their children hostage, and threatened them to cooperation. In the book, it was written that the children cooperated willingly, but I wasn't deceived by such an obvious spin. It came to the day of the decisive battle. The last remaining kingdom of humans on the central continent, the kingdom of Asura, mounted all of their efforts for the final battle. Soon the 7 heroes came, leading the holy knights of Millis and the beast folk in an assault on Laplace's main stronghold. After a violent confrontation, 4 of the 7 heroes were dead, but they successfully sealed Laplace away and destroyed his closest companions. 3 heroes survived: the Dragon King Urupen, the Northern God Kalman, and the Armored King Dragon Perugius. They were referred to as the 3 legendary demon god slayers. But they didn't slay anything. Though Laplace was defeated, the humans were greatly exhausted from the battle and couldn't keep up the fight anymore. Instead, they signed a treaty with one of the demon kings back on the demon continent, one that wasn't allied with Laplace and led a more moderate faction of the demons. The blockade on the demon continent was lifted. The demons could now freely travel to the other continents. According to the terms of the treaty, racial discrimination against demons was prohibited. It was like the United Declaration of Human Rights in my previous world. Present day. The deep-seated trend of discrimination against the demons continued, but things were mostly peaceful. From all this, I understood a couple things. 1, cutting things off at the number 7 was done for historical reasons. There were 7 legendary heroes and 7 worlds. Thus, the lucky number was 7. 6 was unlucky, since there were 5 dragon generals and 5 great demon kings, each of which made 6 when encountered with their respective leaders. 2. The various races like the elves, dwarves, and halflings were like subspecies, but they were counted among the demons. It was possible they were new races that had developed during the chaotic period, or perhaps they had something to do with the Baron folk that first came over. Incidentally, part of the reason so much knowledge about this long history existed was because some species were immortal. This was the case for the great demon emperor Kishirika as well as the few other demon kings. Perhaps there was some sort of magic that made them live forever. And now just a little bit of information about the languages. The most common used languages were the human tongue, used on the central continent, the beast god tongue, used in the northern part of the Millis continent, the fighting god tongue, used on the Greyrat continent, the sky god tongue, used on the divine continent, the demon god tongue, used on the demon continent, the sea god tongue, used throughout the seas. To distinguish them, the languages were named after the gods of the various races residing on different continents. Only the human language didn't use that convention, a decision that might incur the gods' wrath. The humans who spoke the human tongue on the central continent were divided into 3 regions: north, west, and south. Each region's language had minor differences from the others, something like the difference between American and British English. Rudeus's native tongue was the western dialect of the human tongue. Apparently that dialect was mutually intelligible to those of the north, but in other regions it was best not to use it. Men from the western region were thought to be wealthy, and wealth only attracted unwanted, sometimes unfortunate attention. The Millis continent was also split between the north and the south. The north spoke the beast god tongue, while the south spoke the human tongue. As for the sea folk lived all over the waters of the world. I had heard the term fish people before, but I've never seen them in the city. Hooray. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't read a damn word of that right now. I'm saving that for post. I'm not going through that shit right now. So, what does it say? I don't know, but there's probably a comment that I could make about it, but I'm not going to right now, so don't believe it. Anyway, now Rudeus has turned 9, which means that we are in the spring of K416, and that it's been 2 years since Eris became Rudeus' mentor. It's been 2 years since Rudeus became Eris' teacher and mentor, but now he only has 3 years left. It's totally only going to be 3 years till he returns home. But for the past year or so, he's dedicated himself to learning the beast god tongue, which was a fairly simple language to learn, but now he wants to learn the demon god tongue. And this one is a lot more difficult to learn. Rudeus then decides to give his good old friend Roxy a call, or rather a letter, which would take like a month for it to reach her, but Rudeus buys a book written in the demon god tongue and tries to practice with that while he waits. But then 3 months pass, and meaning that we are in the summer of K416 now, and his study hasn't really made much progress. And he actually gave up for a little bit. However, with the help of Ghislaine and one of the heroes from the Legend of Perugius, who has a short story written in it, he was able to pick up the beast god tongue pretty well. But soon enough, and by that I mean like half a year, putting us probably in the winter of K416, Roxy's care package arrived, and it contained a leather-bound book about the size of a phone book and had a letter in it. In the letter, Roxy admits that she actually tried to apply for the position that Rudeus has now, but failed the interview, which I guess the interview being, do you like women? She said no, so I guess she didn't get the job. But Roxy also mentions that each race has their own magic that only they know, and only those who they trust they will teach. An example that Roxy doesn't use, but what I will use, is the beast race's voice magic. It is something that only they know, but they can teach other people that aren't even a part of the beast race, but it is very difficult for someone of the non-beast race to learn that kind of magic. But it is possible. And however, it's going to be pretty difficult for Rudeus to get close to people of like the beast race and who know it, because I don't believe any of the maids know, and I don't know if Ghislaine even knows the voice magic. And so it'd be pretty much impossible for Rudeus to like get close to any of them if he doesn't know the language. And so of course there's a lot of demons out there, which means that they have their own unique magic. And so with Rudeus unable to learn the demon god tongue, Roxy decided to write the textbook for Rudeus, teaching him the demon god tongue. But thinking about the timeline and how long it must have taken her to write the book, it must have been done in like under half a year, so that's pretty impressive. But it seems like that she copied like an entire dictionary from the Royal Library and translated every bit of it, and their meaning, and the use of their words, and how to pronounce them, and Roxy is amazing. And that was only the first half of the book as well. The second half was filled with descriptions and other information about what she knew from various demon races. Each of their descriptions were accompanied by her personal commentary. Don't do this with that race, do this with this race, and yada yada. And there were even different drawings of the other races with their traits highlighted of them as well. But with that said, are you ready for another exposition dump? I'm kidding. There's not going to be anything big like the history and lore that we just got, but we do get a little bit of info. There's a section that's apparently like 5 pages long, like not of the physical book, but in Rudeus's book, going all over the Meagard race and its people. And so it made Rudeus happy knowing that she wanted him to learn more about her people. So that's kind of sweet, but the people of the Meagard race tend to like sweet things, she wrote, and knowing that, he'd like to prepare her something sweet next time they saw each other. And with how much effort Roxy put into this, he was willing to like just kiss her feet. But I feel like he'd like to do that anyways, and would use any kind of excuse to do that, because this is the 3rd time he's talked about kissing people's feet. Rudeus, calm down. But now, before we end the chapter, we don't get another Eris update, be patient, it is coming, but instead we get our first ever Ghislaine POV. Apparently ever since Rudeus got the care package from Roxy, he'd be shut in his room doing God knows what on his days off. And it's always something new with Rudeus. Like, at first, Ghislaine didn't really think much of Rudeus, and Paul was just an overconfident father, but over time, Ghislaine realized that Rudeus certainly was not just a normal kid. And so because of that, Ghislaine was even going to request that Rudeus stay in the manor, even if he never ended up becoming Eris's tutor. But she recalls the kidnapping incident that happened a few months ago, or a few years I guess at this point, and notes that one of the swordsmen was a North God advanced swordsman, and even with the training that Rudeus had at the time, he was able to overcome him so easily and win the battle. Not only did Rudeus have natural battle instincts, he was also very smart that even Ghislaine could even follow his lessons, and even better than that, Eris could. She never thought that she could be able to learn how to read, write, do math, or even be proficient in magic enough to even earn a wand, which is basically like a magician's participation trophy. She had that meant like those were her standards for herself. They were so low. Ghislaine, the village nuisance, had left it accompanying a wandering swordsman at the age of 9. Despite her becoming a saint-tier swordswoman, she was still being turned down to join parties. And when she finally got to join a party, she was continuously degraded into just being some muscle for brain. And so she learned that there was no point in wasting energy to think. She just let others deal with it. And it's honestly really sad, and it's kind of what Eris does eventually, and that's even more sadder. But after the Fangs of the Black Wolf disbanded, she had been swindled countless times and was left with nothing. And due to her discipline from her master, she vowed to never steal anyone's possessions. And so it was on the brink of starvation that she was hired by Soros to become Eris's tutor. But thinking about how far Ghislaine had come, she thought about what she would say if she were to ever return back home. The thought alone was enough to bring her to a smile. She never thought that she'd think that way about her village, but sure enough, a kid that's young enough to be her son gave her the ability to do that. She almost wanted to call Rudeus her master, but her previous master would probably feel pretty disrespected if she did that, and it would be much more appropriate to call Rudeus her teacher, because he is one of the best teachers that she's ever had in his life. And like any time she couldn't figure anything out, Rudeus wouldn't get angry in the slightest. He'd keep rewording it and explaining it until she understood it. And it's thanks to Rudeus' teachings that Ghislaine was able to master the fundamentals of fire and water magic and is now learning how to do it without an incantation. But apparently where Rudeus lacks in sword fighting, he succeeds in spell casting. He thinks far too logically about what he does, and that's what holds him back. She says that his fighting style would be much more suited to the water god or north god style, but unfortunately she only knows the sword god style. However, Ghislaine does know someone that does know water god style, so they might be able to teach Rudeus. It's likely that she's talking about her former master, who is the sword god, because he's also a water god practitioner and is a water emperor. However, because Rudeus lacks a magic teacher, his spell casting has kind of come to a halt, but she thinks that he could even become a god-ranked magician one day. But returning to her original train of thought, Ghislaine wonders about what Rudeus is up to right now. Just recently, he had come into her room asking her to teach him how to speak the beast god tongue. She asked him why, and he said that it was to go to the Great Forest, where many beast folk reside. Further questioning him, he says that he wants to go there because, he might find some cute girls. And there it is. He is definitely a Greyrat, that's for sure. Or I guess, in other words, he's human, because why wouldn't you like a cat girl? They're amazing. But because of how well-mannered Rudeus was, she was convinced that he wasn't actually Paul's son, but little by little, she realized that he definitely had a thing for the beast folk, just like the rest of the Greyrats. Oddly enough, Ghislaine was fine and used to people staring at her body, but she did find it a little uncomfortable when people looked at her tail and ears. But even though Rudeus claims that he was joking, and it's like, oh no, I'm not after the women, nah. But she saw right through him, he's after the women. She says that he would absolutely be a womanizer one day, just like Paul used to say, I'm pretty sure. And lately there was a spark in Eris's eyes whenever she looked at Rudeus, much like how Zenith looked at Paul when she first fell in love with him. And more recently, Rudeus started to learn the demon god tongue, and she thinks that he's going to go on a quest to get women from all over the world. But while Ghislaine was thinking about all this, Eris interrupts her train of thought and asks what she's thinking about. Ghislaine says that she's thinking about Rudeus, to which Eris, with a shade of jealousy in her eyes, says for her to give up because Rudeus is just far too complicated to understand. Eris then asks Ghislaine to train her some more, and she obliges. Apparently, when she met Eris 5 years ago, she was a complete troublemaker, and on her first day, Ghislaine trained her until she couldn't stand anymore. But then that night, Eris snuck into Ghislaine's room and attempted to beat her with a wooden sword, only to have the tides reversed, and she was the one that received the beatings instead. And from then on, Eris stalked Ghislaine like prey and waited for her opportunity to strike. And Ghislaine could relate a lot to Eris, actually, and is part of the reason why she felt such fondness for Eris. At first, Eris would complain about this or that during her training, but she actually, since her 10th birthday, she kind of cleaned up her act and stopped yelling and stopped sullying her clothes. And since Rudeus turned 9, she had been paying more attention in classes, especially etiquette class, likely feeling that she was less mature than Rudeus by the time that she was 9, and she wanted to step it up to make herself look good in front of Rudeus. Eris wanted to be better than Rudeus at least something, and that field she chose was swordsmanship. And according to Ghislaine, Eris was going to reach advanced tier and is likely going to become a saint tier one day. If Eris were to ever reach saint tier while Ghislaine was still teaching her, she would go and bring her to her master. And perhaps she would then take Rudeus along as well. Ghislaine would be interested to see what happens if the two of them ever met. But to wrap things up once more, we have Eris's final report of the day. Name, Eris B. Greyrat. Occupation, granddaughter of the Fidoa's liege lord. Personality, a little violent. Does listen properly. Reading and writing, improving with writing as well. Arithmetic, still bad at division. Magic, can't do any spells without chanting them. Fencing, sword god style, intermediate tier, soon to be advanced tier. Etiquette, can imitate ladylike manners. People she likes, grandfather, Ghislaine, and Rudeus. So hooray, we got a lot of lore, a lot of switched up scenes. The anime really changed the way, it just changed how the scenes were presented, and again, a lot of lore. And we get, again, the thing that happens with the light novel is that we get a lot more different POVs of other people, other than just Rudeus, which is nice, because yeah, we got a couple kind of monologues from Paul in the anime, but it's really the shortened versions of those monologues. And then there's the thing that happens with Eris at the end of the season, where we don't even go into it in the anime. Meanwhile, in the light novel, it'll take me over 20 minutes to discuss just what it is that Eris is feeling about and why she did what she did. And so I really enjoy getting the different POV shots just to see how these other characters feel about Rudeus and feel about just the situation at hand. It's really nice. But anyway, with that is the end of this episode's review. What do you think about the episode and what it missed? Do you love that lore drop? Because, oh god, that's not going to be the last one. But anyway, if you like the video, give it a like and subscribe for more Mushoku Tensei content, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.